Hi and welcome to another plugin of the week. I'm Carly, this is JC, and we are streaming live from our Point Blank studios at our Osman Road complex. We teach a load of things, including DJing, music production, sound engineering, and mastering. And today's plugin is the Sonnox Oxford Limiter. And JC is going to be telling us a little bit more about it. How are you going?
I'm good, and you?
Good.
Good?
So do you want to give us a little brief overview of how a limiter works?
Okay, so typically a limiter, as we know, in the digital world, there's a level which is 0 dBFS, where you can't go higher than that. And obviously, since the last, I would say towards the late 90s, as more digital brick wall limiters were introduced in technology, that allowed us to increase the level. That's because you've got 0 dBFS, and that's your ceiling. You can't go higher than that.
Yeah.
So the way to what mastering engineers, and because there's a demand for loudness, let's not go into that. It has gone completely crazy nowadays. I really believe it's gone way over the top. I don't like it. But I have to, as an engineer, I have to deal with it. I send my mixes to people, and they're saying, well, but it's not loud on the record. So here you slap a limiter, you put it loud, and they're like, people have decided that when it sounds louder, it sounds better. It's a perception thing. Yeah. So limiter, the way you do is that, because you can't go higher than that, that's my 0 dB, I can't push the level, a limiter stops the peaks that allows you to increase the overall level of the program, the average level, which result in our perceived loudness. You push that gain into it, and the limiter stops the peak from going over. So now, the quality of a limiter usually is what's happening when the signal effectively is going above 0, because you have to make it go, but stops it there. What is going on here is what we're interested in. Some limiters, you really hear it. It sounds squashed. It reduces, it flattens up the peak. And there's a whole discussion about dynamic range. Introducing harmonic distortion becomes quite unpleasant at times. So different limiters are built in different ways. Now, Sonnox have done a very interesting design in the way they've approached it.
So what makes the Sonnox Limiter different to others?
It has kind of two sections. Most limiter, you either have a threshold, and you're bringing the level in, and it's limiting, or you push the level into it, and it's limiting. Both works the same way. Usually they don't have an attack time, you may have a release time, and depending on the design, some limiters work better with some material. Sonnox is made of two sections really, where you play with your gain control and limiting. So that allows a little bit more transparency. Okay. I'm not saying, oh, it's great, that means we can make it louder and hear the side effects less. Well, that's great, but it shouldn't encourage to make it louder. What it should encourage is kind of like, oh, I can make it at a reasonable level and have a more transparent outcome.
So the dynamic range will still be compromised, but less inevitable,
but less it's all about perception. Let's have a listen quickly to what it does. So here we've got a bit of a short example. I'm going to cycle it roughly around those points and going to play it. That's without the limiter. And then that's with. Much louder. Okay. So obviously, it's all about the way our ears are working with limiter and mastering as well. You can do things. Our ears are not very good at picking things that happen quickly. Okay? So extremely short change of level over an extremely short period of time goes on hardly noticed to the ears. So if limiting is done quite well, you can treat the ear that nothing is happening. They don't hear those really short, transient. It's when you start making changes over a longer period of time that your ear are starting to kind of like, hold on a second, what is going on? So shall we go through this limiter? So obviously here I've gone quite loud. Yeah.
Would that be as loud as?
I mean, I've got a loudness metering here. Let's see. I am pushing it on a loudness of between -8. I would say it's becoming on the loud side for my liking personally. But I mean, nowadays you're getting to CDs that have so little dynamic range. We're talking 6 dB, where, normally you will have your peaks here. Your peaks are hitting 0, they're fine, just below 0. Your peaks are there, but the average of the track would be somewhere around, let's say, late 80s, early 90s, you would have somewhere around 14 dB of dynamic range between the lowest and the highest.
Okay.
Nowadays, we get to a point where some of the tracks are constantly hitting -3. So everything is there all the time in your face, and it's kind of like, whoa, okay, that can be quite intense. In my opinion, if you play that in club, that's where it can become a bit unpleasant.
So why do you think people do?
There's always been the loud. I mean, we've talked about it, and it's a long subject, and obviously slightly moving away from the plugin, but it comes even from back in the days of jukebox.
Really?
Record company would notice that if a song sounds louder,
people
record company were thinking, people are more likely to dance. Back in the days in America,
so
like
kind of grabs
jukebox in
people's
bars.
attention, I guess.
Exactly, it's about grabbing.
Yeah.
You get all that noise, and I'm louder, I get more noticed.
Yeah.
Look
at me.
There is a bit of that. Now, the reality, it's not working that way, because on radio, you have heavy limiters for broadcasting.
Yeah.
Therefore, actually, the more your tracks have been hammered on newer platforms such as iTunes, Spotify, where they're starting to control the levels a bit better now. And radio, actually, the tracks that are really hammered are the ones that are starting to sound the worst, because they're being brought down anyway. The lowest ones are being brought up, and actually, because the lowest ones haven't been that damaged, they actually sound better. So I think I'm starting to see a change in the philosophy, slowly, very, very slowly. I've got last project I've done was, I've mixed a couple of tracks, and the guy who mastered it was the guy who mastered the last Daft Punk album. And the last Daft Punk album is actually quite low in level. They haven't gone for that crazy. It is mastered at a reasonable level. I really believe every song has a sweet spot, where it still works, and then beyond that sweet spot, it's damage. You're getting into distortion, really. And people, it may be seducing for the last 5 minutes you listen to it, but I really believe after that it's super fatiguing. It's really tiring on the ears. It's just there,
Agreed.
So let's look at I'm going to put it on the B mode now. So here I've got the version which is the UAD version. You have several versions. You've got the native version that you can use with no hardware. You've got one for Pro Tools, if you have a Pro Tools rig, or you have a version on the UAD platform as well. So that gives you quite a choice to set it up. So this one is the UAD version. So now I'm going to look at, the first section that is interesting is the input and pre-process. That's the pre-process and gain control section. So what do we have? We have an input gain. So I'm going to play the track. Typically for mastering, before I start moving into it, typically for mastering, I think most mastering engineer, when you set your compression and even your EQ, you tend to select the part that is the loudest in your music, rather than the quiet part, because otherwise you're going to have a surprise when you hit the very loud part. So I've selected one of the parts which is the loudest, which is where I'm going to set my limiter. And also one thing to bear in mind with limiting is that limiters, the first thing that get affected is bottom end, the bass. Okay. So if you have too much bass on a track, this is usually where you're going to start hearing the limiter starting usually to, if you push it too much, distorting the bass. The Sonnox does a pretty good job at that. I've taken a track that wasn't mastered. So what I've done very quickly is I've EQ'd it a little bit to simulate what you would do in the mastering situation. Typically in a mastering situation, you tend to do EQ first, a bit of compression to glue, and start getting some gain. And then the limiter is always last. So I've just done a really rough basic EQ, very gentle, just to be fair to the track, or to the limiter as well, to hear the process. So first, what you're going to do on that plugin to start with is, here in the input section, you've got a threshold and an input gain. The threshold doesn't work like in normal section. The input gain is where you're getting your boost of level. The threshold is linked more to what are you aiming at. So when you master and you limit, you may master for CD, but you could master for TV or for a movie. All of those have different standards of level that are acceptable. So with a CD, you're aiming at 0 dB. Yeah, 0 dB is your barrier. So the threshold, you can leave it at 0.
Okay.
That means things are going to start to be limited when I'm pushing above 0. So first, I'm going to bypass that, and I'm going to play the track just to see. You see here on my track, I've got about 5 dB margin. That means whoever, actually 4 now, 3.8, whoever mixed that track has been gentle enough to leave the mastering engineer
Does that
some
make
dynamic
you happy?
range. Yes, of course. But, otherwise I would turn it down. But that means it hasn't been limited at the mix.
Yeah.
Obviously, otherwise there's no dynamic range left. You want things to play with. So what it means is that if I push it here by about 3.8, roughly, I'm at 3.6, nothing is happening. It's louder, but look, there's no reduction. And sometimes people have this misconception. It's kind of like, oh, you've already made it 3.6 dB louder. I have, but I've just pushed the level. I could have done it here. I'm not hitting 0, which is my threshold here. I'm not, my output as well, that I'm setting at 0. While I'm not hitting that, there's no gain reduction going on. Okay?
Yeah.
So for gain reduction, so let's carry on. For CD, that's the output trim. We'll talk about it later. It's nice to leave a margin, but for now I'm going to leave it at 0.
Okay.
So if you want more loudness, obviously, from now on, if I push, I'm going to start bringing my level above my 0, above my ceiling. This is when it becomes interesting. This is when the limiter starts doing its thing. Starting to do its thing. And you're seeing things happening here. You're seeing on the gain reduction meter as well. So that section all together, the input and preprocess work together. That's the gain reduction in relation to that section here. That's the first section. So let's put a loudness meter. Okay, so we've already pushed it quite a fair bit. I mean, you see we've gone from minus 20 to now around minus 12. Now we're really pushing it around the minus 9. So that's becoming a loud master. Okay, so I'm going to keep my threshold here. For now, here in the pre-process section, what's interesting, you will notice it has an attack. Most limiters don't have an attack because the job of a limiter is to catch the transient as fast as possible, so you don't go over 0. With a slower attack, that means the transient can go through. Now, the fact that you can have a setup and attack here means that you can leave some of the transient going through.
Okay.
So you're still keeping the punch. The transient is your kick, your snare, anything that has a fast attack. If you start limiting that and shove them off completely, there's no more punch.
Ah, I see.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So the fact that I can have a slower attack is really good news in my opinion.
Yeah, that's great.
And however, the problem is that means I'm not catching those overshoots.
Okay.
There is other places I can do that. So suddenly straight away you realize the balance between this section and the next one is where you're getting the best of both worlds. Now, how to use Willy's term on a limiting? Usually you want to go as fast as possible. Because, well, like I said, if things happen quickly, the ears don't perceive it. If you start limiting over a longer period of time, your ear is going to notice it. Okay? So in mastering, normally, and I'm not going to go general because it depends on the music itself, but in general, you want your release to be as fast as possible, but too fast, you bring distortion. So it's that fine balance. So let's bring it down completely. See here, it's catching up quickly, but in my opinion, it's distorting the top end a little bit more aggressive on the hi-hat, on the snare. So I'm going to increase it a little bit. You see how different straight away it is? And if I do it here, it stays longer. Now I'm starting to hear it. I'm starting to hear the pumping effect a little bit. So you want to find the right balance. That's aggressive. That's kind of better. Another function which is really useful is the softney. Softney is based on a kind of optical design. What it means is that at that stage, as soon as the signal goes above the threshold, it compresses straight away at its maximum. A soft knee is a rounder approach curve of compression.
Okay.
That means as the level approaches the threshold, it starts gently compressing it. It's a more subtle curve,
Okay.
if you like. Can be quite useful. Again, that means it's less effective as a limiter, but can be more musical.
Yeah.
The fact that you can bring that up a little bit, I think is a really good thing as well. Okay? So
Nice.
that's for our section here. The last function here, that's your gain reduction. So let's see what it is. It's reading a kind of a 4 dB reduction, which is pretty okay, in my opinion, for above 6, that's when you start hearing a lot, far too much. 4, let's see, I mean, let's the ears be the judge of that. The auto gain here is an extra compensation. That tends to be used for when you have wide different range in the musical program over a longer period of time. I'm not talking the small difference of level, I'm talking a part that is super quiet and a part that is super loud, but quite over a long period of time. That can help the limiter deal with it.
Okay.
So at times it's worth trying the auto gain or not. On that track, I don't feel there's a need for it.
Cool.
But it's there if you wanted to. Now we get to the next section, which is the enhancement section. Then that's really one of the strong features of Oxford in terms of not other limiters have this function.
So the attack and the enhance are kind of
quite unusual on
specific to this
limiters.
one.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely, Carly. Yeah, totally. So the enhance function, as you can read here, I've got the help menu, so it tells you what it is. It's basically a way to increase perceived loudness.
Okay.
Again, I'm saying that if the name of the game in the job you're doing is to make it as loud as possible, you've been told that's what the client wants, then you've got to find a way to do that in the most subtle possible way. That's achieved that by adding dynamic harmonic distortion, things that makes you think when you hear it, oh yeah, it sounds louder, it feels louder.
Okay.
So one thing to bear in mind is that there's two modes, safe mode and not the safe mode. In the normal mode, which is without the safe mode, you don't have full sample clipping happening. Sample clipping limiting means full limiting happening. That means you still can have overshoot going through. And as you can see, I'm still going in the red. Now, if I put the safe mode on, let's see if I'm still going in the red here.
We're in the safe zone.
You see what I mean? So very important. The safe mode means that the enhance button works in a different way than in normal mode. In normal mode, only partial, kind of full sample value limiting happens, unless you bring it to 100%. At 100%, now you have full, so I've got it 101. You see I'm not going in the red anymore. Yeah? So what has happened by doing that, not only by putting it at 100%, my program sounds louder, or feels louder, I'm perceiving it as being louder, but on top of it, it's limiting fully. So you see how those two sections work together. Here I was able to retain some of the transient by having a slower attack, and still here I'm increasing the level and also making sure that the limiting happens completely, therefore not going over 0 dB, therefore having a master that is playable.
Okay.
Yeah?
Cool.
That's kind of how it works. And then from 125, then you can really increase the perceived loudness. However, from what I'm hearing, it feels, you start to hear really the distortion. There's a lot of distortion happening. It may work as a special effect on a special track, but as a general master, I don't think it's so good. It sounds loud. Okay? Now, in the safe mode is great because you can bring the enhance right down, and I'm getting full limiting. And then here, all you're doing is that play with the loudness, but I'm not playing with high limiting.
Okay.
So different ways. from 100 and 125, they work the same way in both safe and normal mode. So let's try a bit of enhance here. You see how it feels louder? Let's redo it again. But what you noticed with an enhance, and I think you mentioned that before when we were trying it out, is it feels a bit brighter.
Yeah.
That's the harmonic. That's the harmonic distortion.
Yeah.
You really hear it starting to hear it on the hi-hats.
Yes.
And things like that. And also because the limiting that is happening is stronger, the bass is starting to become tighter.
Okay.
So because of that, you perceive less bass and more of the top end and the information in the middle.
Okay.
So that's what's happening here. Yeah?
Yep.
So starting to sound good, starting to sound loud.
It is.
Okay, so output trim. To finalize, output trim is basically you say you're not going anywhere above that.
Okay.
That's your. Now, typically, you never put it at 0. It's good practice in mastering to have it at, let's say, 0.1, for example. I loved how precise it is. I mean, 3 decimals behind. It's really super precise. 0.1 would be the minimum. I personally leave it even at lower than that, sometimes 0.3. Because what happens is, I'm doing this master, let's say, for CD, 16-bit, 44.1, I give it to you. You turn it into an MP3, okay? And I've gone 0.1. Chances are, once you've converted it as an MP3, it goes over 0 again.
Ah, I see.
Because any type of conversion, like sample rate, changing the mode, the format, the peaks, it increased the peaks again. So I would recommend put it slightly lower as another safety.
Okay.
Okay, that's what all those new methods like mastered for iTunes, for example, that's what they're trying to do with that, is not to end up with MP3s that are clipping.
Right, okay.
Okay?
Yep.
So that's your output trim. So to be safe, I'm going to put it at 0.3. I mean, we've lost 0.3 of level, but I'm sure we can.
I think we'll cope.
We can cope with that. Okay, another interesting things here. Const reconstruction meter, also known as intersampling meter. Between each sample, you can have some peaks getting through. Okay, a normal meter may not pick them. Okay, and here, you see, it's not picking them up. But let's have a look here. You see those red things that are going on? My meter in Logic is not picking them up like others. But here it's picking them as others. What is it? They are so fast that most normal meter don't pick them up.
Oh, okay.
But they are extremely fast in between each sample. This one is a true peak metering, and without the reconstruction, you've got a true peak metering.
Okay.
As much as it's true to its peak, what happened between each sample is not being picked up. So sometimes in mastering, you need a reconstruction meter or interpolating sampling metering. Very super precise for those very short peaks that you don't detect. If those peaks are here, what do they do to the sound? It can affect, for example, the converter that you're using. Converters normally can cope with that. But if you've got deconstruction, it could pick. That means you're introducing distortion as well. So very important to make sure that those interpolating samples are not, you don't get any over. So now that I've got my reconstruction metering, I know I'm going over. How can I deal with it? You've got this magic button called auto comp.
And that's all you do?
It's basically bring them down now. See?
Oh.
It's dipping them in slightly grey, but
nifty.
So between this and this, you've got, this and the way you use those two and this one, that's another level of limiting in addition to your input pre-process.
Okay.
So that's why this design allows you to get a lot of the level with maybe less side effect than other limiters do. I'm not saying it's the only one that's untransparent, you know, but it's a very, very good limiter.
This is your go-to limiter, isn't it?
Yes, that's the first one I try. Yeah. That is the first one I try. Sometimes I use a couple. Sometimes if I do, sometimes I prefer to do a couple of dBs here and a couple of dB here, rather than have one hammering. So different, but it is. I like the transparency of it. It's really transparent. And finally, you've got a dithering section. I'm not going to go into dithering, when you should do it. I mean, all of these limiting, deconstruction, dithering, you've got a lot of different type. And the new version can even give you depth. That is absolutely insane. You can put the depth of the dithering, which I've never seen before. On good monitoring, you will hear the dithering. Dithering is there to help with the truncating that goes from one bit depth to another. We won't go into that. For now, I'll leave it as a normal TPDF. All those topics we discuss in really great depth
we do.
on the mastering course. I've written a whole section on dithering and measuring your dithering and what you should listen for.
For someone who doesn't have a load of experience or knowledge about mastering, is this easy enough for them to have a play around with and use?
I think so. I mean, obviously, it's still not that difficult to set up, I would say. And also, obviously, you have plenty of presets to play with. Okay, cool. So you could have a brick wall. You could have a clean and gentle, controlled, crunchy, and you're getting fattened, hot and pumpy, and I think you have. Pardon me. You have plenty of presets. I think actually starting with preset is a good place to maybe learn as well how it works. Put a gentle one, a moderate one, and a fierce one, and see how it sets differently.
Yeah, it's a really good learning tool, isn't it?
Absolutely. Finally, the thing for me with limiter is that, and compression, if you listen like that, you play to somebody a track like that, and then you play it like that, chances are you say, oh, this one sounds so much better. Because it sounds louder.
Yeah.
It's a natural thing. And that's one of the reasons why this war of loudness.
Yeah.
The reality is it doesn't always. So what would be interesting to do is I tend to always, whatever I do, compare at the same level. Okay? Because that's the only way to actually find out what am I doing? What have I done to the sound?
Yeah.
Compare always when you compress, when you limit to at the same level, and then you can really judge. Okay, now I can really hear the difference, what is happening. Yeah. And then you may realize it's too much. Let's back off a little bit.
That makes sense.
So that's without. Pretty much same perceived level. So let's really try to listen and what's happening. Okay. I personally really can hear the clap is being smashed and what follows a little bit.
Yeah.
Here without much punch. Inevitably they've been sacrificed. We could try maybe a little bit, add a bit more attack to see if we can get away with that. I think that's better. Yeah, I'm more happy with that. Now I've been able to compare. So now I can push it back up to whatever desired level you need to have it on. I'm going to put it at 0, let's say around here. And that's our master. Now, it is really loud. I mean, it's -6 for me. You could push it more. I mean, that's the crazy thing about this limiter. Let's push it more. Now you're really getting... And now you're getting into that territory of, I mean, have a look here, -4 general level. This is super loud. Too loud, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But still, I still find that it does the job in the most possible transparent way.
Cool.
So that's...
Thank you very much.
You're very
You're a
welcome.
wealth of knowledge.
Thank you very much.
And if any of you guys out there would like to learn more about mastering, mixing, sound engineering, or DJing, just head to our website, pointblankmusicschool.com, where you can find out a bit more about our courses. And just a little heads up, we've also launched a school in Ibiza. So find out more about that on our website. Also, we'll be back very soon with another plugin of the week. Bye.